Russian pianist and composer Anton Rubinstein's nephew, Nicholas Rubinstein, suffered from severe depression and financial ruin in 1888. During what was meant to be his comeback concert in Moscow, he deliberately slashed his wrists with a concealed razor blade while performing Chopin's Funeral March. Blood streamed onto the piano keys as he continued playing, the audience initially thinking the red liquid was part of an elaborate stage effect. He completed the entire piece before collapsing on stage. Medical records show he lingered for 3 agonizing days, during which he reportedly hummed the same funeral march repeatedly until his death. The blood-stained piano was preserved in a Moscow museum until 1917, when it mysteriously disappeared during the Russian Revolution. Contemporary newspapers described the performance as simultaneously the most beautiful and horrifying musical experience witnesses had ever encountered. On November 29, 1970, hikers discovered a severely burned female corpse in Norway's Isdalen Valley. Every identifying mark had been methodically removed, clothing labels cut out, fingerprints burned away with acid, dental work filed down. She carried false passports and spoke multiple languages fluently. Hotel records showed she used different identities and wigs while traveling across Europe. Her suitcases contained disguises and coded notes. Intelligence agencies refused to release files about her case. Many believe she was a Cold War spy eliminated by her own handlers. Her identity remains unknown 54 years later, buried under the name Isdal Woman. Pope Stephen VI's hatred for his predecessor reached such extremes that he orchestrated one of history's most macabre legal proceedings in 897 AD. Pope Formosis's decomposing corpse was exhumed after 8 months, dressed in full papal vestments, and propped up in a chair facing the papal court. A deacon was appointed to speak for the rotting defendant during the trial for perjury and violating canon law. When found guilty, the corpse's blessing fingers were severed with a sword, his papal garments stripped away, and the putrid remains were dragged through Rome's streets before being cast into the Tiber River. The grotesque spectacle horrified even medieval Romans. Stephen VI was later imprisoned and strangled by opponents disgusted by his actions. The incident sparked political chaos that weakened papal authority for decades, demonstrating how personal vendettas could corrupt the highest religious offices. Discovered in a Roman shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901, this corroded bronze device initially puzzled archaeologists who dismissed it as a simple clock. However, X-ray analysis revealed an intricate system of 82 bronze gears that could calculate astronomical positions with remarkable precision. The mechanism could predict solar and lunar eclipses decades in advance and track the movements of known planets. What makes this discovery particularly haunting is that such technological sophistication vanished from human knowledge for over 1,300 years, suggesting entire civilizations of knowledge were completely erased from history. Modern scientists have struggled to recreate its precision using contemporary methods. The device represents a lost golden age of engineering, demonstrating that ancient Greeks possessed computational abilities far beyond what historians previously imagined possible. According to urban legend, a mysterious arcade game called Polybius appeared in Portland, Oregon in 1981, causing players to experience seizures, amnesia, night terrors, and suicidal thoughts. The black cabinets allegedly appeared overnight in suburban arcades, monitored by men in black suits who collected data rather than quarters. Players reported addiction despite the game's disturbing psychological effects. The cabinets supposedly vanished as suddenly as they appeared, leaving no trace. While no concrete evidence exists, conspiracy theorists believe Polybius was a CIA mind control experiment disguised as entertainment. testing behavioral modification techniques on unsuspecting civilians through subliminal programming embedded in the gameplay. Witnesses described the game's graphics as unusually advanced for 1981, featuring vector-based imagery and strange geometric patterns that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally. Players allegedly experienced time loss, returning to consciousness hours later with no memory of playing. The legend gained credibility when former government employees confirmed MK Ultra programs did experiment with electronic media for psychological manipulation during that era. On Christmas Eve, 1945, the Sauter family home in West Virginia caught fire. Parents George and Jenny escaped with 4 children, but 5 children aged 5 to 14 apparently perished upstairs. However, no remains were ever found in the ashes, despite the fire burning for only 45 minutes. The phone lines had been cut, the family truck wouldn't start, and the fire department took 7 hours to respond. The Sauters received threatening letters and mysterious phone calls afterward. A private investigator found evidence suggesting the children were kidnapped by the mafia. The case remains open, with the family convinced their children were taken alive. George Sauter had previously clashed with local Italian-American businessmen over Mussolini, making enemies in the community. Strange circumstances included missing ladder that had been placed against the house lights that remained on during the fire, and Christmas presents found undisturbed in the basement. The family spent their life savings on private investigators and billboard campaigns, maintaining hope their children survive somewhere. On January 20th, 1996, multiple witnesses in Varginha, Brazil, reported seeing a damaged craft crash into the city outskirts. 3 young women claimed they encountered a strange creature with red eyes, brown oily skin, and 3 horn-like protrusions on its head, giving off an ammonia-like stench. Brazilian military allegedly captured the wounded being, transporting it to the local hospital where it died shortly after. Within 3 weeks, 3 firefighters who reportedly handled the creature died from mysterious infections despite being healthy young men. The military denied involvement, but local residents documented unusual helicopter activity, roadblocks, and the disappearance of physical evidence from the crash site. Witnesses described the creature as 4 feet tall with enormous red eyes and skin that appeared to sweat constantly. Hospital staff reported strange equipment arriving at night and unusual military personnel taking over an entire wing. The incident became Brazil's most famous UFO case, inspiring documentaries and investigations that continue today, despite official denials. Reports began surfacing in the 1990s of children aged 6 to 16 appearing at doorsteps, car windows, and isolated locations, demanding entry with unusual persistence. Witnesses described these children as having completely black eyes, no whites, iris, or pupils visible, pale skin, and an unnatural ability to remain perfectly still. Encounters typically involve the children speaking in monotone voices, asking to use a phone or bathroom, while creating an overwhelming sense of dread in witnesses. Those who refuse entry report subsequent illness, vehicle breakdowns, and persistent nightmares. Skeptics attribute the phenomena to internet folklore, but documented police reports and medical records from multiple countries describe similar encounters, with witnesses often requiring psychological counseling afterward. The children allegedly appear in groups of 2 or 3, wearing outdated clothing and speaking with formal, adult-like vocabulary. Witnesses consistently report feeling an urgent need to help these children despite overwhelming fear. Some encounters occur in remote locations where no children should logically be present. Alpha PvP, known as Flakka, causes extreme hyperthermia where users' body temperatures spike to 106 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, literally cooking their brains and internal organs. The synthetic cathinone triggers violent psychotic episodes lasting 12 to 24 hours, during which users exhibit superhuman strength and complete disconnect from reality. Emergency room doctors report patients clawing at their own skin until muscle and bone are exposed, convinced that insects are crawling beneath their flesh. Some victims have chewed off their own fingers, eaten glass thinking it was food, or attacked strangers believing they were demons. The drug's molecular structure prevents traditional sedatives from working, requiring multiple officers to restrain users who can tear through handcuffs and break bones without feeling pain. Hospital restraints often prove inadequate as users demonstrate impossible strength levels. The drug creates a perfect storm of hyperthermia, paranoia, and violence that can last for days. Medical staff require specialized training to handle flakka cases safely. Soviet archaeologist Mikhail Gerasimov's team opened the jade tomb of 14th century conqueror Timur in Samarkand on June 20, 1941. Inside, they found an inscription in Persian warning that disturbing Timur's remains would unleash catastrophic warfare. The archaeologists dismissed this as superstition and proceeded with their excavation, photographing the conqueror's skeletal remains and noting evidence of his historical leg injury. Exactly 72 hours after opening the tomb, on June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history, beginning the USSR's deadliest conflict. Stalin reportedly ordered Timur's remains reburied with full Islamic rites in 1942, after which Soviet forces began turning the tide against German forces. Local religious leaders had pleaded with the archaeological team to respect the burial site. During a 1982 geological survey of underwater cave systems in Siberia, a team of 6 Soviet Navy divers encountered a catastrophic equipment failure when liquid nitrogen coolant from their diving apparatus began leaking at depth. The extreme cold instantly crystallized their breathing gas, creating ice formations that blocked their respiratory systems. Unable to surface quickly due to decompression requirements, the divers became trapped as their gear literally froze around them. Their bodies were discovered by a rescue team weeks later, perfectly preserved in ice-cold water like macabre sculptures. The incident was classified for decades, with families told the divers died in a training accident. The cave system was permanently sealed and all research records were destroyed. Survivors from the rescue team reported finding the divers' bodies positioned as if they were still swimming, their equipment frozen in crystalline formations. The 1948 Somerton Beach mystery deepened when investigators discovered a scrap of paper sewn into the deceased man's clothing pocket containing the phrase "Tamam Shud," meaning ended in Persian, torn from a rare poetry book. The corresponding book was later found with an indecipherable code written on its back cover. In 2021, researchers using advanced computational analysis suggested the code might represent the first letters of a romantic poem rather than espionage cipher. However, the man's cause of death remains unknown despite extensive toxicology testing. His fingerprints matched no database, and dental records yielded no identification. DNA analysis in 2022 provided potential family connections but failed to reveal his identity. The mysterious man wore expensive clothing with all labels removed and carried no identification. His physical condition suggested an active lifestyle. 34 years before the famous Strasbourg dancing plague, a similar outbreak struck Aachen, Germany in 1374, spreading rapidly across the Rhine Valley. Thousands of people began dancing frantically in streets, churches, and fields, unable to stop despite exhaustion, dehydration, and broken bones. Victims reported seeing demons and angels commanding them to dance, their movements becoming increasingly violent and self-destructive. Many collapsed from heart failure, while others danced until their feet bled through their shoes. The epidemic spread to Belgium, Luxembourg, and France before mysteriously subsiding after several months. Medical historians theorize ergot poisoning from contaminated grain, but the synchronized nature across vast distances remains unexplained. Contemporary chronicles describe people dancing for days without rest, their eyes rolled back, foaming at the mouth. Some participants died from exhaustion, while others recovered with no memory of the ordeal. 9 experienced hikers died under mysterious circumstances in the Ural Mountains in February 1959, their tent cut from the inside, bodies found scattered in the snow wearing minimal clothing despite sub-zero temperatures. Soviet investigators noted radiation on their clothes, missing eyes and tongues, and severe internal injuries without external trauma. Recently declassified documents suggest the group encountered a failed Soviet missile test, possibly involving experimental weapons. Military witness testimony describes orange spheres in the sky that night, consistent with missile malfunction. The hikers' diary entries mention strange lights days before their deaths, and radiation readings at the site exceeded normal levels for decades afterward. The campsite showed evidence of extreme force that flattened trees in a circular pattern. Autopsies revealed injuries consistent with high-pressure shock waves. The Soviet military immediately classified all evidence suggesting state involvement in the tragedy that killed some of the country's most experienced outdoors enthusiasts. Computer models predict that in approximately 250 million years, Earth's continents will converge into a massive supercontinent scientists call Pangea Ultima. This continental collision will trigger catastrophic volcanic activity, releasing enormous quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and creating a runaway greenhouse effect. Surface temperatures will soar to 104 to 158 degrees Fahrenheit globally, making the planet uninhabitable for mammals. The interior regions of this supercontinent will become vast, waterless deserts where temperatures exceed human survival limits even in shade. Ocean currents will stagnate, creating massive dead zones, while the extreme heat will prevent cloud formation, eliminating Earth's natural cooling mechanisms and ensuring the extinction of complex life forms. The supercontinent formation will also trigger massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that dwarf anything in recorded history. Coastal regions will experience permanent drought as ocean evaporation decreases dramatically. In March 2010, the Dutch cargo vessel Marianne Vos was discovered drifting unmanned in international waters near the Solomon Islands, its engines still running and navigation lights functioning normally. The ship's galley contained half-eaten meals with food still warm on plates, personal belongings scattered throughout crew quarters, and no signs of struggle or distress. The final logbook entry, written in shaky handwriting, simply stated, "Strange noises outside. Investigate tomorrow." Maritime rescue teams found no trace of the 12-person crew despite extensive air and sea searches covering thousands of square miles. The vessel's cargo hold was intact, ruling out piracy, making the crew's complete disappearance one of modern shipping's most disturbing mysteries. Investigators found life rafts undisturbed, emergency beacons unused, and navigation equipment functioning perfectly. The crew's personal effects, including wallets and photographs. Tipu Sultan, ruler of the Kingdom of Mysore from 1782 to 1799, maintained a private menagerie of man-eating tigers and lions specifically for executing prisoners of war and political enemies. British military records document horrific scenes where captured soldiers were thrown alive into the animal enclosures during public spectacles. Tipu's palace walls were decorated with tiger motifs, and he commissioned a mechanical toy tiger that simulated mauling a British soldier, complete with sound effects of screams and growls. After his death during the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War, British forces discovered human bones and clothing fragments scattered throughout the big cat enclosures, confirming the gruesome practice had been routine. The mechanical tiger, now housed in London's Victoria and Albert Museum, still functions after 200 years. Contemporary accounts describe Tipu's fascination with tigers as religious obsession, believing he would be reincarnated as one. On November 24, 1971, a well-dressed businessman calling himself Dan Cooper hijacked Northwest Orient Flight 305, claiming his briefcase contained a bomb. After receiving $200,000 in ransom money and 4 parachutes, he jumped into a freezing rainstorm over southwestern Washington's dense forest, wearing only a business suit and loafers. In 1980, an 8-year-old boy found $5,800 in deteriorating $20 bills along the Columbia River, their serial numbers matching Cooper's ransom money. The discovery proved Cooper survived the initial jump, but forensic analysis revealed the bills had been underwater for years, suggesting his ultimate demise in the wilderness. His true identity remains unknown despite hundreds of suspects investigated. Weather conditions included 200-mile-per-hour winds, freezing rain, and zero visibility. Cooper's polite demeanor and aviation knowledge convinced investigators he was likely a military paratrooper or commercial pilot who meticulously planned history's only unsolved air piracy case. On September 22, 1979, at 3 a.m. GMT, U.S. Vela Satellite 6911 detected a characteristic double flash over the Prince Edward Islands near Antarctica. The signature matched exactly with nuclear weapons testing, a brief intense flash, followed by a longer, dimmer secondary illumination. Seismic stations recorded possible blast waves, and radioactive fallout was allegedly detected in sheep's thyroid glands in Australia weeks later. Despite investigations by the CIA, FBI, and international nuclear monitoring agencies, no country claimed responsibility for the explosion. Theories range from a joint Israeli-South African nuclear test to a meteor impact. But the 22-kiloton blast equivalent remains officially unexplained. The incident occurred during heightened Cold War tensions, raising fears of unauthorized nuclear weapons deployment. The Blood Eagle was allegedly the most brutal execution method in Viking culture, reserved for enemies and traitors. The victim was placed face down while the executioner used an axe to cut the ribs from the spine. The rib cage was then pried open like wings, and the lungs were pulled out and arranged over the victim's back to resemble an eagle's feathers. Salt was often rubbed into the wounds. While some historians debate whether this was purely literary invention, several Norse sagas describe it in explicit detail, including King Ella of Northumbria's alleged execution by Ivar the Boneless in 867 AD. On March 31, 1922, 6 people were murdered with a mattock at a remote Bavarian farm. The most disturbing aspect was that someone had been secretly living in the attic for days before the killings, eating their food and using their tools. The victims included the elderly couple who owned the farm, their daughter, her 2 children, and the maid who had only worked there for a few hours. The killer remained on the property for several days after the murders, feeding the livestock and eating meals in the house. Despite extensive investigation, no one was ever arrested for these chilling crimes. In Falaise, France, in 1457, a sow and her 6 piglets were formally charged with murder after attacking and killing a young child. The mother pig was dressed in human clothing, given a fair trial with legal representation, found guilty by a jury, and publicly hanged in the town square. The piglets were initially sentenced to death as accomplices, but were later pardoned due to their youth and lack of criminal intent. This bizarre case reflects medieval beliefs that animals could be held morally responsible for their actions and needed to face divine justice. Dr. Henry Howard Holmes constructed a 3-story hotel in Chicago specifically designed for murder during the 1893 World's Fair. The building featured soundproof rooms, gas chambers, a basement crematory, quicklime pits, and a surgical table. Guests would check in, but never check out. Holmes installed chutes leading directly from guest rooms to the basement, where he would dispose of bodies. He sold skeletons to medical schools and extracted organs for experiments. The exact victim count remains unknown, with estimates ranging from 27 to over 200 people. The hotel was eventually torn down after his execution. In 1963, Louisiana wildlife photographer Harlan Ford discovered massive 3-toed footprints in the Honey Island swamp, each measuring 15 inches long with webbed impressions. Local Cajun hunters described encounters with a bipedal creature standing 7 feet tall, covered in gray hair, and emitting a putrid stench of rotting fish and sulfur. The creature allegedly had amber eyes and would let out bone-chilling screams that echoed across the swampland. Ford's 16mm film footage, though grainy, shows a massive humanoid figure moving through the cypress trees. Some researchers theorize it could be a surviving population of prehistoric hominids or the result of secret military biological experiments conducted in the remote bayou. Local fishermen report finding mutilated alligator carcasses with wounds suggesting an incredibly powerful predator.